George Orwell was not born a genius, nor a revolutionary. He became one. His real name, Eric Arthur Blair. An ordinary boy, but one who early on recognized the injustices of the world. Born in 1903 in India, when the country was still part of the British Empire, he grew up in a lower middle-class family with airs of nobility, an uncomfortable contrast. He lived in that game of appearances, where people try to seem more than they really are. How many today live that same charade? Maintaining an unsustainable lifestyle, smiling while drowning in unpaid bills. From an early age, he learned that reality and illusion walk hand in hand, a lesson he would never forget. He studied at prestigious British schools, but without the privilege of attending university. Imagine being surrounded by wealthy boys, sons of influential families, while trying to fit in without truly belonging. It was there that he realized the world has invisible rules. Some people are born with advantages, others have to fight for every penny. Have you ever felt that? Working harder and earning less? Seeking recognition but getting nothing in return? The barriers of society aren't always visible, but they are inescapable. He never earned a college degree, but did that stop him from becoming one of the most influential writers in history? Not for a second. He learned in the rawest, most authentic way, by living in the alleys of London, the streets of Paris, and the books he devoured without needing a professor to tell him what to think. Today, anyone can do the same. Want to learn philosophy? Read Plato's Republic. Want to understand human behavior? Try Thinking, Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. What's missing isn't access to knowledge, but initiative. He understood this through experience. True wisdom doesn't come from a diploma, but from a hunger to learn. The name George Orwell wasn't just a pseudonym, it was a rebirth. Eric Arthur Blair was a young man trapped by labels and limitations. But Orwell, he was a free man. How many people today need that kind of reinvention? How many are stuck in an identity that no longer makes sense? If he were alive today, he might say, if you don't like your story, write a new one. And often, that change doesn't depend on waiting for something to happen, but on making a decision. His childhood wasn't marked by wars or grand tragedies, but by something even more powerful, the discovery of the world's hypocrisy. He saw that truth could be manipulated, that power distorts facts, and that not everything is as it seems. This realization became the foundation of everything he would later write. A sharp eye for reality, a mind that questioned, and a spirit that would never accept lies as an answer. This was just the beginning of someone who would forever change the way we see the world. After leaving school, he did something that seems unthinkable for those who know his legacy. He became part of the very system he would later criticize. He joined the British Imperial Service as a colonial police officer in Burma, Southeast Asia. The irony? He soon realized he didn't belong there. Imagine dedicating your life to a job only to discover it contradicts everything you believe in. He witnessed the brutality of colonialism firsthand, the fear in the eyes of the natives and the disdain on the faces of the English. How many today live something similar? Working jobs they hate, feeling like part of a system that oppresses rather than builds. This experience left a deep mark. He realized that power corrupts. Not just rulers, but anyone who submits without question. He saw dehumanization happening before his eyes and, worse, realized he was part of it. Guilt consumed him. How could someone who saw the truth keep pretending? He couldn't. So, he did the unthinkable. He resigned from his post and abandoned the empire he served. It was time to see the other side. But trading his uniform for worn-out clothes wasn't easy. He decided to immerse himself in the reality of the forgotten. He worked as a dishwasher in Paris, wandered through London, slept in filthy hostels, and survived on crumbs. All to understand, firsthand, what it meant to be one of the invisible. He was no longer a distant intellectual. He was one of them. Want to understand discipline? Try military training. Want to understand the human mind? Listen to strangers' stories. He did exactly that. It was during this phase that he developed a genuine appreciation for ordinary people and a growing discomfort with intellectuals detached from reality. He realized that the true thinkers aren't in universities, but on the streets, in factories, and in the fields. Perhaps this is still true today. Those who understand life best aren't necessarily the ones with the most degrees, but those who have truly lived. He understood that the most valuable knowledge isn't learned solely from books. It's absorbed through human experience. This lived experience would shape his writing and his worldview. The truth isn't found in official versions, but in the stories of those no one listens to. If there's one thing he learned, it's that power always tries to rewrite history, and that was something he could never accept. He was never the type to simply write about injustices. He wanted to feel them firsthand. That's why, in 1936, he went to Spain. His initial goal was to cover the events as a journalist, but upon arriving, he realized the situation was far more complex than any news report could describe. The streets were tense, and the ideals people were fighting for were more complicated than they seemed from a distance. Faced with this reality, he made a decision. He couldn't just observe, he had to act. He joined a militia fighting against authoritarian regimes and went to the front lines. There, he didn't find heroism, but fear, cold, and uncertainty. War was nothing like political speeches or idealized narratives. During one of the clashes, he was shot in the neck. His condition was critical, and his journey almost came to an end. As he recovered, he realized it wasn't just his life that had changed. His perspective on the world had too. While still recovering, he noticed something unsettling. The news about the Civil War didn't match what he had witnessed. Newspapers distorted events, emphasizing certain facts while ignoring others, and contradictory versions circulated as absolute truths. It was then that he understood. Reality can be manipulated, and control of information is one of the most powerful tools in the world. This realization would shape his thinking from that point on. He saw that the line between idealism and oppression was thin, and that often groups claiming to fight for freedom ended up replicating the very things they were fighting against. This contradiction left a deep mark on him and reinforced his conviction. Truth cannot be adjusted to serve interests. He returned home with a new mission: to use his writing to reveal what so many insisted on hiding. The war in Spain wasn't just an isolated event. It was the spark that ignited his fight against the manipulation of information. From then on, his books wouldn't just be accounts, they would be warnings about the dangers he had witnessed up close. For him, literature became an essential tool of resistance. Books had the power to reveal hidden truths, to expose what many chose to ignore. Through writing, he could warn about the dangers of manipulation, encourage readers to question, reflect, and, above all, seek the truth for themselves. The greatest threat to critical thinking wasn't the absence of information, but the abundance of distorted data that confused more than it clarified. He took it upon himself to ensure that certain voices continued to challenge this reality. This vision shaped everything he would write from then on. More than telling stories, he wanted to provoke unease, awaken critical thinking, and break through complacency. With this purpose, he began working on one of his most striking works, a tale that, under the guise of a fable, delivered one of the most powerful political warnings in modern literature. In 1945, he published Animal Farm. The plot: a group of animals drives the humans off the farm and promises to build a new society based on equality. However, as time passes, the leaders of the revolt adopt increasingly authoritarian stances, becoming as oppressive as those they had overthrown. This narrative wasn't just a critique of the past, it was a warning about how power can corrupt any ideal. After all, power can change hands, change faces, but not always its essence. The book brilliantly exposed how noble ideals can be twisted when mixed with ambition. At first, the animals believed they were fighting for justice, but soon found themselves trapped in a new structure of domination. The truth was rewritten, inequality persisted. Iconic lines like, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others," exposed the hypocrisy of those who reach the top and create their own rules. It wasn't just a political critique, it was a dissection of the danger of the illusion of change. The genius of Animal Farm lay in its simplicity. Its message was accessible to anyone because, at its core, it wasn't limited to a specific regime, but to cycles that repeat throughout history. Governments, corporations, social groups. Whenever there's a structure of power, there's a risk that those who control it will shape reality for their own benefit. That's why the work remains relevant to this day. It reminds us that the question isn't just what will change, but who will truly benefit from that change. The success was immediate, but it also sparked controversy. Many tried to interpret it as an attack on a single political group, but the critique was broader. It didn't matter which side was in charge. There would always be a risk that the pursuit of equality could be used as justification for new forms of control. The problem wasn't revolution itself, but what those who assumed power did with it. This idea would set the stage for his darkest work, the one that would forever redefine how we see the future. It was in this context, amid a storm of challenges, that 1984 was born. He had lost his wife, was battling tuberculosis, and knew he didn't have much time left. Even in his weakened state, he devoted himself obsessively to the book, feeling that its message needed to be heard. When it was published in 1949, his vision of the world seemed extreme, but over time, it proved to be frighteningly prophetic. A universe where surveillance is total, information is manipulated, and even thoughts can be considered criminal. In this dystopia, control isn't limited to laws but extends to the very perception of reality. People are monitored by Big Brother, bombarded with propaganda that rewrites the past, and convinced that any thought contrary to the regime is a crime. Terms like doublethink and newspeak showed how language can be used to restrict the ability to reason. After all, if you don't have the words to express an idea, how can you even conceive of it? The protagonist, Winston Smith, tries to resist this system, seeking the truth on his own. But fighting against a regime that redefines reality at every turn becomes impossible. In the end, it's not brute force that defeats him, but psychological manipulation. Winston doesn't just submit. He comes to believe what he once knew was false. This is the true warning. The most dangerous tyranny isn't the one that imposes fear, but the one that convinces people to accept their own submission. Over time, 1984 transcended its status as a novel and became a concept. The term Orwellian came to describe any form of excessive control over information and privacy. This demonstrates how his message remains relevant. The book wasn't just a dystopian prediction, it was a mirror of trends that were already taking shape. Its goal wasn't just to scare people, but to warn them of the danger of making the unacceptable seem ordinary. After the release of 1984, he no longer had the strength to keep writing. Tuberculosis was advancing rapidly, and his health deteriorated by the day. Not long after, he passed away. But his legacy was secure. His experiences had become timeless warnings, ones that still make us reflect on the direction of society. His name was already etched in history, and his ideas would continue to echo, influencing generations. When he died in 1950, he likely couldn't have imagined the magnitude of his impact. His books, initially controversial, gained strength over time. 1984. An Animal Farm were translated into dozens of languages and became reference points in discussions about politics, philosophy, and psychology. What kept his works so relevant? The answer is simple. He didn't just write about historical events, but about human patterns that repeat. His critical eye transcended his time, becoming a guide for those seeking to understand the present. The term Orwellian solidified as a warning against authoritarian regimes, information manipulation, and excessive surveillance. Whenever narrative control, distortion of truth, or subtle censorship is discussed, his name resurfaces as a reference. But his ideas aren't always understood correctly. Many cite him without truly absorbing his vision, reinterpreting his critiques to fit their own beliefs. This shows the complexity of his legacy. His works are so powerful that they end up being appropriated in different ways, both by those who defend freedom and, ironically, by those who seek control. His books weren't just critiques of political systems. They were reflections on human nature. The danger didn't lie solely in governments or institutions, but in how people behave in the face of power. Tyranny doesn't always need to be imposed by force. It's often accepted voluntarily in the name of security, stability, or even the common good. Perhaps that's why his popularity has only grown. His ideas don't belong to a single historical moment. They're a mirror of what we're willing to accept. Though he's often cited as a critic of totalitarianism, he never rejected the idea of a fairer system. He wasn't against socialism, but against any form of extreme control, regardless of who was in charge. His goal wasn't to defend a specific economic model, but to question how power is exercised. While many tried to label him, the truth was more complex. He believed socialism could be an alternative to capitalism, as long as it didn't become a tool of domination. If there's one thing his work teaches, it's that truth should never be the monopoly of a single group or system. The pursuit of truth requires constant questioning, not passive acceptance. Reality can be distorted in many ways, whether through the manipulation of information, the alteration of language, or the imposition of singular narratives. The greatest danger isn't just in those who try to control the truth, but in those who accept it without question. Freedom begins in thought. If we give that up, it won't matter who's in charge. We'll always be vulnerable to any narrative that convinces us thinking differently is a mistake. If you don't seek your own truth, someone will impose it on you.